Hello, everyone, and welcome to Greg's and Beto's virtual rally. My name is Mimi Martinez. I am an immigrant activist for the Latinx community of Tulsa, and I have been working in education for the past 8 years. I have to say, I'm super excited about the conversations we're going to have today. We will discuss on economic development, investment in education, public and mental health, housing, and even touch on immigration issues here in our community. Of course, joining us today is running candidate for mayor, Greg Robinson, who was born and raised in North Tulsa. Greg has witnessed injustice from the time he was a young boy, and as the son of an African American activist, his vision is to guide democracy, justice, equity, and safety for all Tulsans. Also joining us today, I'm very excited to announce former Texas 16th Congressional District Congressman Beto O'Rourke, as well as our amazing moderators, Emilia and David. I personally have to say that I'm very grateful to be with candidates today that are not only open about speaking the Spanish language, but are also very open about the Latinx community. To all of our viewers, please listen carefully to what our panelists have to say. Feel free to write your comments and your questions in the chat box. And now for the moment that we have all been waiting for, let's welcome Greg and Beto. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. And I'm just so excited to be here tonight with you Tulsans, and also with just someone that I truly admire, Congressman Beto O'Rourke. He's someone who has visited our community, has visited Black Wall Street, and someone who stands for the same values that I do. And that's what I'm excited to talk with you all about tonight and over the next 13 days of this election. Is what kind of city do we want to be? I believe that we can be a city where, regardless of your race, your socioeconomic status, or your zip code, you have a pathway to upward mobility. That's why I'm running for mayor, and I'm excited to dig into that vision and how we can achieve that tonight. So help me welcome Beto O'Rourke as well.
Greg, thanks for asking me to join you today. And Mimi, thank you for the introduction. And everyone who's supporting Greg, I want to thank you for doing this. It's the only way Greg can win. It's the only way our democracy can work. It's the only prospect we have of a brighter future for Tulsa, and by extension, for this country. And it's what has brought me here today. As you can imagine, I'm in El Paso, Texas. I am in the westernmost of the 254 counties of Texas. Probably at home, like everybody else on this call, where we have been for the better part of the last 4 months, but intently focused on Texas because, as you all may know, and no disrespect to Oklahoma, but we have 38 electoral college votes here. And I am hell-bent on making sure that they are denied to Donald Trump and are awarded to, because he will have earned them, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, becoming the first Democratic nominee to win the Electoral College in Texas since 1976, when I was 4 years old. And we're also helping an extraordinary number of state house candidates, because we have a chance to win a majority in the state legislature for the first time in 20 years. And by the way, Texas happens to be the most racially gerrymandered and voter suppressed state in the union. It's what led us to become 50th in voter turnout, not because we love our democracy less than Oklahoma, but because we were literally drawn that way. And some people were literally drawn out. Add to that voter ID laws, the most onerous in the country, the fact that Texas has closed down 750 polling locations, especially in communities of color, in communities where Black Texans are moving in increasing numbers. And you understand what we're up against. So I would not leave Texas, even virtually, except for Greg Robinson. And I'll tell you why. I met Greg almost a year ago to the day. I think it was maybe the 18th of August. I know because I kept a journal during our all too brief run for the Democratic nomination for president. And I have an entry on the 19th of August, and it starts out with, I spent the morning with Greg Robinson and a number of other people in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, also known as Black Wall Street. Neither name had I ever heard before, though I grew up and was taught in public schools in your bordering state of Texas. Though what happened in Greenwood and in Tulsa and Black Wall Street 99 years ago is one of the most defining moments in American history, that story was lost. And much like the voter disenfranchisement here in Texas, not by an accident of history, but 100% on purpose. And it was left up to Greg and other amazing people who are on this call to make sure that story was told. And the story of those in Tulsa who were murdered for their success, murdered for their prosperity, murdered because of the color of their skin, and whose survivors were terrorized into keeping quiet and silent about what had passed. And in meeting Greg and this fierce determination to make sure that their story was told, this fierce determination to make sure that I, somebody who was seeking a position of public trust, would be held accountable for knowing that story and then acting on that story. And then this optimism that infuses everything that Greg does, that is so infectious and could not but make you like the guy, want to get to know him and get behind whatever he's doing. All that stayed with me almost a year later, and many hundreds of miles away to the west and south of you all here in El Paso, Texas. The night before, we were at a place called the Welltown Brewery, and Greg was the first speaker of the evening, and his performance, his speech was electrifying. And Mimi, you're right. Not only is he incredibly charismatic and energized and connects, unlike almost any other speaker I've heard in English, he also does the same thing in Spanish. And as a fronterizo here in El Paso, Texas, a community where all of us speak both English and Spanish, it defines our way of life. And yet those whose preference is to speak Spanish for so long have been left out of the conversation again on purpose. To see somebody running for public office who is not pandering, but is communicating, and this, more important than anything else, is listening in English, and he's listening in Spanish. He's listening whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, if you could give a heck about political parties to begin with. If you are disenfranchised and cannot vote because of a criminal background or incarceration, or because you're not a citizen, no importa to Greg Robinson. He wants to know your story and include that story in the American story. Last thing, and this has really stuck with me, Greg, and I've been thinking about you, and I've been thinking about Tulsa, and I've been thinking about our shared history as Americans. A year ago, and we talked about this when I met you in Tulsa, a year ago and almost 2 weeks now, a man drove 600 miles from Allen, Texas to my hometown of El Paso, Texas. Now this man was fueled on the hatred and the racism that has defined the American experience for as long as there has been one, for at least 401 years now. But the racism, the hatred amplified by a person in the most powerful position on planet Earth, Donald Trump, who calls immigrants animals, asylum seekers an invasion, refugees an infestation. These are all words he used to seek to dehumanize our fellow human beings. He took their kids from them by force, put them in cages, lost the lives of 6 of them, 6 kiddos who had traveled 2,000 miles, who were in our custody and care, the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, largely comprised of refugees and asylum seekers from the world over. This is what he did in our name, because we are still, although it is becoming an open question, we are still a democracy. And though Donald Trump made those decisions were in our name and are on all of us until we make it right. This guy who had heard the president say all these things, warn about this invasion, laugh when the president once asked, what do we do about all these immigrants coming to our country? And someone in the crowd yells, shoot them. And the president smiles and he laughs and he encourages it. Well, this guy in Allen, Texas, drove 600 miles to El Paso on the 3rd of August. And with a legally purchased AK-47, a weapon designed, engineered, sold to the militaries of the world because it is devastatingly effective at killing people in great numbers and very quickly, wearing tactical gear and ear protection and eye protection, walks into this Walmart on a Saturday one of the biggest Walmarts in the greater Southwest. And it's the Saturday before the first day of school. So parents and grandparents are there with their kids and grandkids, getting all those last minute back to school deals, the backpacks, the notebooks, all that jazz. This guy walks in with this weapon of war and just begins opening fire indiscriminately. And maybe that's the wrong word, because he was actually seeking out people who looked Mexican or Mexican American or looked like they were immigrants and didn't look like the majority in this country. 23 people slaughtered, dozens more grievously wounded. You all know that high impact, high velocity round, whatever hole it creates as it goes in, blasts a hole out the size of an orange or larger, destroys your internal organs. Devastation. And it made me think about Tulsa, where military grade weapons, including airplanes, were used against the citizenry, our fellow human beings, our fellow Americans, your fellow Oklahomans, in an act of hatred and racism that was never, ever addressed or even told to the rest of the country. So I got to tell you, we are inextricably linked as Americans, and we are certainly inextricably linked in these tragedies. But I got to tell you, Greg, one of the reasons I'm here supporting you is we're also inextricably linked in our pursuit of justice. There has to be justice for every single person who experienced this injustice, and every one of their descendants, in your case, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I know that one of the major planks of your platform is guaranteeing that story is told and justice is delivered. So look, on top of everything else that you want to do, the inclusive economy that you want to create, the transparency in city government, minimizing the power of special interests and maximizing the power of everyday citizenry. Your focus on mental health at a time that the largest provider of mental health care services in so many of our states is the county jail system, so that if you're schizophrenic, if you have bipolar disorder, you might very well try to get arrested on purpose to go to the one place that you're guaranteed care and safety, a bed, some clothes on your back, and perhaps a prescription medication. You, by being elected, by serving as the next mayor of Tulsa, are going to make that a better city. And an already great American community will become a leading American community with you at the helm. So that's why you've got this El Paso in, joining you all virtually at great distance, but with great love and admiration for Greg and for his commitment to service and the way that he's inspired me already. So, ladies and gentlemen, the next mayor of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Greg Robinson.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. Beto, you hit right home, and thank you for those beautiful remarks and recognition, especially to our Latinx community and our African American community here in Tulsa. Next, I would like to introduce our amazing moderators. I will start with Emilia Nguyen, and I just want to say I admire her so much. She's so passionate, and I know she's going to accomplish great things. She's a rising sixth grader in Carver Middle School at Tulsa Public Schools. She's involved with the Tulsa Debate League, volunteers for Oklahomans for Equality, and is a proud Robinson Fellow. She believes in the power of youth as leaders for racial justice. Welcome, Emilia. Then we also have David Blatt. He joined the MPA program at the University of Oklahoma in January of 2020 as the George Kaiser Family Foundation Professor of Practice. He has a PhD in political science from Cornell University, a master's from McGill, and he lives with his wife in Tulsa, who teaches pre-K education in Broken Arrow Public Schools. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, I get to kick it off, and thank you very much for this opportunity, and Congressman O'Rourke for joining us today. First question for both of you. We know that cities are tackling the coronavirus epidemic with minimal support from the state and federal governments. How can local leaders make their needs known to their state and federal partners?
Well, thank you, David, for being on with us. And thank you, Emilia, as well. It means a lot to have Tulsans from, pardon me, David, but different points in the life perspective here on to talk about these important issues. And you certainly bring up one that is something we have to address for our most vulnerable and for our youngest Tulsans here. And that's why I think the key is truly to understand that this is not just an economic crisis or a health crisis, but it is also a housing crisis as well as an education crisis. And for me, that's why we have to bring together stakeholders and leaders from all of those sectors and with one voice advocate for the resources that we need and for the people that need them the most. The thing that we know that this pandemic has exposed is the deep inequities that face our families. And so I can't help but think about those families in West Tulsa or in Northeast Tulsa that have struggled for a long time to get access to equitable educational opportunities, access to accessible housing and transportation. And we know that this pandemic has only worsened that issue. And so we have a responsibility to come together from all those different sectors and elevate and advocate on behalf of the people who have entrusted us to serve and protect them.
David, real quick to add on to what Greg just said, all of which I agree with. We face this real challenge right now where you have, and I'll just use Texas as an example, you have an all-white male Republican statewide leadership who believe in a philosophy not really of limited government, but that government is the problem. And yet you are faced with the deadliest pandemic of the last 102 years, where if there were ever a need for a competent and a comprehensive government response and a strategy that we can all follow, it is now. And yet we are left to our own devices. And as Greg pointed out, this is not hitting all of us equally. This isn't one of these, some people have said, well, coronavirus, it's something that we're all struggling with together. That's not right. Disproportionately, Black people are getting sick and dying. Disproportionately, Latinos and Latinas are getting sick and dying. If you look at the three counties of the Rio Grande Valley, Cameron, Hidalgo County, and Starr County in Texas, 90 to 95% Mexican American. They've run out of space in the mortuaries. They've run out of space in the hospitals. They're stacking bodies in refrigerated trucks right now. 9,300 of my fellow Texans have died. Most of those deaths preventable, all of them predictable when we refuse to follow the public health guidance. So who are the standouts? Who's actually leading in that vacuum of leadership? It's mayors, it's county judges, it's local public health authorities. Another reason I'm really excited about Greg, here's somebody governed by the science and the facts and the truth. Let's save lives and we'll let the politics sort itself out. We've got the reverse going on in our state governments right now.
Okay, so my question is, with current economic crisis, tens of thousands of Tulsans, like residents from other cities, are facing the imminent threat of being evicted. What should elected officials be doing to help keep renters and homeowners in their homes?
It's a very pivotal question, and it really gets to the root of how we have to act right now to address the inequities that we know are only worsening. And so when you think about what we have going on here in the city of Tulsa, we know that we're already sort of going into a housing crisis, and the pandemic has created an eviction crisis for us. And so we have to get resources to our most vulnerable Tulsans, rental assistance. We have to ensure that they have access to mediation before the eviction process starts. And then once they get into that process, they have to have access to legal representation. Those are things that working with public and private partnerships, we can continue to provide access for. And as the first question really referenced, we can advocate to our county government, which we know has CARES dollars, and to our federal government as well, to support our citizens in that way. Long term, though, there's a reality that our landlord-tenant sort of balance is off. We have laws here across our state of Oklahoma that are focused and supporting landlords far too much. And frankly, it's not just damaging the tenants and their ability to stay in their homes, but it is also damaging landlords' ability to keep tenants in their homes. And so we've got to look at this as a process of what can we do right now and what can we do later. And I want to address something that Beto touched on in his first answer, which is it is why I was so upset at the decision making of Mayor Bynum not to continue to stand up to Governor Stitt and to President Trump and push back and put in common sense policies to keep Tulsans safe through this pandemic. Instead, we had a supercharging event right here in our city at the worst time. And so I think it's incredibly important that we understand the role that we play as leaders, as political leaders, and the need to provide the sorts of services that we know people that are struggling to feed their families, struggling to stay in their homes need, but also think about how this pandemic has given us an understanding that we need to improve policies like the landlord-tenant rights in the future so that we are able to adapt after the pandemic.
Yeah, one brief thing that I'll add, Amelia, is that, this is another example of the vacuum that's been created by failed federal and statewide leadership. There was a moratorium on eviction, and that was allowed to expire without congressional action. The president issued an executive order that is absolutely toothless. It provides guidance and suggestions on how we might address it, but there's no mandate and there's no force of law behind it. So really, it is going to be up to the municipal leaders in Tulsa to protect those renters. And I love the way that Greg puts it. I mean, it's really ensuring that you restore balance to the renter-landlord relationship. That landlord has, she's got rights in this as well. She has expenses related to her property, and she needs to make sure that she receives an income so that she can continue to pay the taxes on it. And she may be stretched really thin right now. We don't know every single person's story, but Greg points out that balance is out of whack. And for that small business owner who might own an 8-unit multifamily apartment building and may not be rich by any measure and really just be getting by, what if instead of pitting them against the renter, you had the state government or the federal government step in, much as they've done with other small businesses through the PPP program, and say, look, everyone's going through hard times right now. We're going to extend a forgivable loan to help you make ends meet so you don't take it out on your renters right now. But we haven't done that as a country. And so it's really going to be up to innovative municipal leadership to bridge that gap. So great question. And I'm afraid this is an issue that we're going to be hitting up against real hard in the coming days and weeks.
Okay. So our cities, whether it's Tulsa or El Paso or anywhere else, remain highly segregated along class and racial lines. What kind of policies should governments be promoting to break down barriers and to ensure that people living in all neighborhoods have greater opportunity?
Yeah, thank you, David. And this question really gets at the core of why I'm running for office. I think that for too long, we've sort of tried to pretend our way to peace. And when you hearken back to the words of the great Martin Luther King, and he says that we've got to be more devoted to justice than we are just to maintaining order. I really think that that's got to be a guiding principle in our philosophies and in our policies. We are ready as a city. I think we're ready as a country to move beyond the partisan rhetoric that has given sort of a home to white supremacy and a home to systemic racism, and really intentionally close equity gaps through policy. And so that's something that I can promise you as mayor I'm going to do. I'm going to bring people from all different perspectives to the table, but I'm also going to hold firm on the fact that everyone in the city of Tulsa, whether they've been here 30 minutes or 30 years, whether they come from affluence or whether they come from nothingness economic wise, have a pathway to upward mobility. And I don't think that we can just talk our way to doing that. I think we've got to intentionally put in policies across housing, education, and economics that make that a reality.
I love that answer. I think that's so good. And I thought it was so interesting that you brought up housing in that first question about the response to COVID. And how, this is not just an issue of a virus or access to healthcare or testing or contact tracing. All those things are important, but it is related to literally every other dynamic of American life. And, we have to look no further than the president and his Twitter account to understand what has long been going on in this country. As many people have said before me, the president says the quiet parts out loud. So when he tweets, suburban housewives, I'm going to stand against subsidized housing in your communities. What he is saying is, I'm going to make sure that Black people do not move into your neighborhoods. It's not even coded anymore, right? And I think it forces us to acknowledge that this did not begin with Trump, and it won't end with Trump either. He may amplify it, he may stoke it, he may be the most brutal face of a problem that we have never fully resolved for the last 400 years. But it long precedes him. And so the concentration of wealth that Greg alluded to, the concentration of poverty and inequality on purpose, not by accident, no accident where the smokestack is. The best predictor of your proximity to a polluter is the color of your skin in America. And as Greg pointed out, that's not unconnected to COVID. So if you've been living next to a polluter and you've been breathing that stuff in since you were born, your rates of asthma, your rates of heart disease, the conditions that are preconditional to getting very sick from COVID or dying from COVID are much greater. No wonder then that it is the Black community, it is the Mexican American community, it is communities of color and communities who do not have literally the wherewithal to protect themselves against pollution or the front lines of climate change that are also bearing the brunt of the devastation and death that has followed COVID. So I love what Greg says. Look, we've identified it, we're calling it out, but words are not enough. The actionable policies are to stop the massing of poverty, to make sure that housing is treated as a right. I mean, so many of our fellow Americans live in their cars, if they have cars, live on the streets, if they do not right now, in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet that world civilization has ever known. Certainly we have the resources to make sure our fellow Americans, our fellow human beings are doing okay. And guess what? It's not going to come from the federal government anytime soon. It won't come from our state governments. It's going to be Greg and the city council with whom he works. Now, I think Greg would probably be the first to tell you it wouldn't just be Greg and the city council. It's going to be the citizens who hold him accountable and who step forward with the best ideas and also the pressure. And I've been on a local city council here in El Paso. That pressure is so necessary to hold you in check and to make sure you really deliver on the commitments that you made on August 12th of 2020 before the election. Remember, Greg, when you said you were going to address this issue in housing? Well, Greg wants to, but you holding him accountable ensures that happens. It's one of the reasons I'm excited about the way he's running. Very transparent, very accountable, very connected to the people that he wants to serve and represent. I think it's the only way you address an otherwise intractable challenge like housing after decades of redlining, after decades of very racist policies in terms of where people and pollution are placed in our communities.
My next question is, you've both been outspoken in calling attention to structural racism in American society. How can elected officials ensure that the community they lead engage in constructive debates and effective action to confront structural racism?
Yeah, Amelia, Exactly right. This is something that I have not shied away from. And it's because I truly believe that our pathway to becoming the city that we're destined to become is by confronting the mistakes of our past. And I think we have to understand that, yes, I'm a young Black man that grew up here in the shadows of Greenwood, but I recognize that we all live in Native American territory, which has been stamped for us by the McGirt ruling. And we have to do a better job of honoring the traditions, the cultures, the stories of our Native American brethren. We also have to do a better job of ensuring that our Latinx brothers and sisters don't feel as if they are strangers in their own city, in their own homes. But frankly, we have a Hmong community that exists here in the city of Tulsa. We have a Russian community that exists here in the city of Tulsa. And so what I am bringing out is the fact that when we open ourselves up to talk diversity, to be inclusive, it actually is a key to our prosperity. And we are inextricably linked in that way. And so my commitment is not to shy away from that, but to teach citizens when necessary why it is important to cross those racial lines of difference so that we can together build a community that is more equitable and is more prosperous, regardless of the background that you come from. But we've got to move past sort of sweeping these issues under the rug because they've been too hard to talk about in the past. I simply am not going to accept that. And I'm excited because I think Tulsans are ready to lead the country in this way.
It's so hard to follow you, Greg, and I just want to say I agree with everything that you say, and leave it at that. But I'll add, because perhaps there's something I can add as a white man who, I mentioned I grew up, a curious kid, a decent student, particularly a student of history, and I didn't know the story of Greenwood. I didn't know the greater story of Tulsa, and really, honestly, until I probably through the 1619 project, I don't think I fully understood the impact of slavery beginning in 1619 that is with us today, and not just in the things that I've been led to believe were the manifestations of later-day slavery, the criminal justice system, the world's largest prison population, the police violence that we have been unable to address or resolve or bring justice to. No, it's education, it's housing, it's a maternal mortality rate that is bad for white women, but 3 times as bad for Black women in this country. It is our politics in a voter suppressed state like Texas. It's literally every single part of American life. So I think, especially for, I'll speak for myself as a white man, very important to listen and to hear people's stories and to hear our story never told before in official settings. That completely changes my understanding and appreciation of America. And I think only when you begin to understand that story do you begin to have a chance to make real progress. You all may know or read or follow Brian Stevenson, and I sought his counsel and advice on how to address these very excellent questions, like the one, Amelia, that you just asked. And he said it begins with storytelling. And until, he said, look, Beto, in South Africa, after apartheid, you had a state-sponsored, really the international community sponsored, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Everyone in South Africa was forced to learn the story of that country. After we won World War II with the Russians and the British and the French and occupied Germany, we forced everyday Germans to go to the concentration camps so they could never deny their history and their participation, witting or unwitting, in the destruction or the attempted destruction of the Jewish race. After Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis were made to share a common understanding of what happened. Nothing like that has ever occurred in the United States. And it begs the question, if Black Americans are a minority today and are likely to be a minority for the foreseeable future, it cannot be simply through population and the power of numbers. It has to be through allies, partners, communities, and this country as a whole, ideally, in my opinion, through some kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, some kind of reparations legislation that would facilitate that conversation. But at a minimum, Brian Stevenson said, every single city has to tell its story. And again, I began my part of the conversation with how I met Greg Robinson. Greg Robinson telling me the story of Tulsa, and not just telling me as Beto O'Rourke, telling me as, look, you want to serve this country as the commander-in-chief, you had better understand my community if you're going to have a chance of doing a great job. That was powerful and profound for me, and exactly what we need to do as a country. So Amelia, we've got our work cut out for us, and I hope that work, it sees meaningful progress over the course of my lifetime, and that we do get to the justice that Greg was talking about, and that Greg has been fighting for his entire life. But I know with leaders like Greg, we have a much better chance of doing that. And again, if it's not happening at the national level, it can happen at the local level and move up from there. And I think that's the power of Tulsa.
Great. Beto, I know that you have other obligations and have already stayed with us a little longer than we may be scheduled, and we greatly appreciate that. So we're just going to turn over to you for some final comments.
Well, I think you are very tactfully saying that I talk too much, and I can be briefer in my answers. Look, I'm happy to spend this time with you all. When I came to your community as a stranger, you welcomed me. You really made me feel at home. And as eager as you were to tell me the story of Tulsa and really the whole story of Tulsa, you were also very interested in hearing from me. And I won't forget that night at the brewery where there were so many people who showed up, that there were folks out on the sidewalk and out on the street who were listening through the open windows. The electrifying introduction that Greg gave that made all of us who were traveling with our campaign take note, and many thousands more who are watching by live stream, some of whom I hope are joining us today. Tulsa is a place that will always stay with me, and it's one to which I want to return as soon as it's safe for all of us to travel. I want to be there to congratulate in person Mayor Greg Robinson and to learn about the great things that he's doing for this community. Greg, I want to say thank you to you. I perhaps like many of you on this call am badly in need of hope and cause for optimism. There is so much to despair about if we let ourselves. This pandemic that's already claimed nearly 165,000 of our fellow Americans. We're 4% of the globe's population. We've lost 25% of the globe's deaths related to this pandemic so far. And those deaths have not been experienced equally across the country. And we've addressed that. The economic downturn that both David and Amelia asked excellent questions about. And again, the disproportionate impact on job loss and economic loss and the loss of wealth in this country. The very public murder of George Floyd, and beyond that injustice, the fact that the police officer who killed him looked at us right in the eye. He knew he was being transmitted via that cell phone camera, and he looked at all of us as if to say, I can do this in this country. It is okay for me to do this. I'm white and he's black, and that's the way it works. And understanding the work that we have before us, and then the fact that our democracy is under attack unlike any time in the history of this country. This is really the most important, the most difficult, the most challenging year in our lifetimes for sure, and would rival 1860, 1865, 1932 for pivotal, epical moments that will define the future of this country one way or the other. So how do you not give into that temptation to despair and just say, the hell with it? We're up against forces larger than any one of us. I give up. You find someone like Greg who could do anything. It's obvious when you hear him speak, when you see his resume, the expertise, the talent that he has, and that he chose to pursue public service. And a tough road to begin with, made tougher when you're in the minority party in that state, and I can speak from experience here in Texas, made tougher when you're not plugged into the traditional networks of money and power and privilege, and yet made all the more necessary by the host of challenges that we just described on this call so far. That's inspiring stuff to me. That gives me cause for hope and reason to be optimistic. And again, I wouldn't leave Texas, even virtually, in this pivotal year for our state, but for someone like Greg Robinson. If that guy has the courage to do the necessary job at this moment, who am I to let him do it by himself or without help from his friends here in El Paso, Texas? So, Greg, we've got your back out far west and south of where you are right now. We are so looking forward to you winning, to calling you mayor, and then seeing what happens, the great things that you're going to do in the future for your community from there. To everyone who's on this call supporting Greg, I just cannot thank you enough. And last thing, the eloquence is unrivaled. The vision is unparalleled, but without money, it's not possible. And if you can give $500, by all means do it. If you can give $50, if $5 is your capacity, Greg will tell you every single penny will be put to its highest and best use to reach the voters who will decide this critically important election for Tulsa. Amy and I are going to be donating all the way from El Paso, and all we expect is a handshake should we come to City Hall. Really, we just want to see good governance for your community. I know that you all want the same. Please donate to Greg, and if you've donated, consider donating again. Again, he'll make the most of it. Greg, thanks for having me on. We are super grateful.
Thank you, Beto. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your words, and thank you for the service that you provide, not just your community in El Paso, but our country. I deeply appreciate it. As someone who came down and visited our community with earnest and sincere interest, and then stayed in touch with us and have come back during such a critical time. And so I hope that our Texas brethren are not too jealous that we got you for a few minutes. I know what it means for you to pull away from them down there, but certainly appreciative. And we truly are in this together. So you take care, and we truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
All right. So I think I have to now face the music from my local Tulsans. And so I'm ready for you all's second round of questions.
Sure. We know that one of the really contentious issues has been around relations with the police in recent months. So can you tell us what specifically would you do as a new mayor to develop trust and good relations with the Tulsa Police Department?
Yeah, I think when I think about this, for me, it's about putting our public servants, our police officers, in the best position to be successful, while also including community members and community stakeholders in the process for building the sort of public safety approach that they want to be governed by. And when I look at this, I see an opportunity to be much more holistic in our public safety approach. Right now, we're investing $122 million in public safety, but it's all going to the police department. I think that has to be reinvested into mental health resources, frankly, public health resources, to ensure that we're not asking our officers to do more than their jobs. We're not asking them to be mental health professionals. We don't need to ask them to be social workers or immigration officials. They got into this work to help people. I believe that, and we need to allow them to do that. But we also need to understand that if we don't engage community on community policing strategies, if we don't engage community on a use of force policy, if we don't critically put together an office of the independent monitor that has citizen oversight and has the powers that are needed to provide real police accountability, then we are not going to truly build a bridge between communities that have felt attacked in the past by police. We're not going to be able to close that relationship gap. And so for me, this is really elevating the conversation. We understand what has happened in the past weeks with the Black Wall Street it's Memorial. I'm sorry, the Black Wall Street area and the Black Lives Matter mural. But I will tell you, I am much less concerned about a mural than I am about how we are bridging the gap between our community and our public servants. And so I want to be able to combat poverty, not criminalize it. I want to be able to ensure that we are building up the citizens and the people of Tulsa, not locking them up unnecessarily. And right now, we just do not have the mental health infrastructure and mental health resources that are necessary to really get to the root core issues that Tulsans are facing across this city, whether they be people from 46th Street North, 61st Street South, or 33rd Street to the west. We have to do a better job of supporting Tulsans. I think that starts with providing a much more robust mental health infrastructure. And I think we do that through the lens of our public safety approach.
I am next. I have a question for you, Greg. As we're experiencing racial separation throughout the country, with anyone, but as specifically related between Black and Brown citizens of Tulsa, why should Latino voters trust you, and why should the immigrant community trust you, especially after all these current events?
Yeah, I will tell you that when I was in the 5th grade, I got the opportunity to live in San Luis Potosi, Mexico. And as I was eating lunch with my family there, I looked up to see my host family crying, and I asked what was going on. And they had lost a cousin crossing the border via the desert. And naively, as a 10-year-old would, I asked, why would anyone want to cross a desert? And that's when my host brother, Diego, looked up and said, creí que era la última opción, que ella buscaba una vida mejor. And that simply translates to she thought that it was her only option. She was looking for a better life. And that was a huge lesson for me. I understood certainly the freedoms and the opportunities that we had here, not just in Tulsa, but in this country. But it also made me understand the humanness that we all experience. And so what I would say to the Latinx community and to every community that may be saying, I don't know who this guy is, I don't know if he's just talking, understand that I am someone who was taught by my father that you have to be able to stand on the side of justice regardless of the personal cost. And you've got to be able to advocate for people when they're at their lowest and when they have the least. That's just who I am. And so I'm committed not just to speaking for communities, but giving them voice. And so we will have an extremely representative cabinet. We will look to increase the diversity of our city staff, from the departments to the authorities, boards, and commissions, because when we have more inclusive voices at the table, then we all become stronger. That's what I'm about. What are the options of increasing prosperity in areas that have been structured to fail? How are we going to promote the evolution of the importance of social services? Thank you, Uriah, for the question. I think I'm going to take this and really answer it from the economic perspective. When we think about the way that the city of Tulsa has been structured for a long time, we've really been built around these golden corridors. And so if you don't live sort of in the areas with all the amenities, you have to travel. Your access to amenities is further away. Your access to transportation and cleaner air, as was mentioned earlier, and job opportunities and housing is more difficult when you go to the west of the Arkansas River or to the north of Highway 244. And so we have to be more inclusive in our economic growth approach, really creating a community wealth mindset and investing in opportunities like community development corporations and community land trusts. What this will do is it will put the power of development back into community members' hands. Whether you're in West Tulsa or in South Tulsa, you will have a stake in what is developed and how development dollars are spent. That, especially coming out of the COVID-19 crisis, is critical as we try and create more localized economies and ensure we can get people back to work and have jobs that are paying them a living wage. You also speak to the social services question. And again, this is why my investment and emphasis on mental health supports and public health supports is so dogged. The fact of the matter is that if we don't support our communities and their infrastructure around clean air and walkable communities and mental health, then our education system is not going to be what it should be or could be. Our communities are not going to have a socioeconomic diversity to them, and we're not going to be able to retain the sort of culture that people want to bring their families and to live in and stay in. And so we have great opportunities here in the city of Tulsa to be an inclusive city that everyone wants to be a part of, but we've got to be intentional about the way we spend those dollars. And the last thing I'll say on this question is that's why I am so emphatic about adding a participatory element to our budget. So Uriah, you can be a part of that conversation with your city councilors, with your department heads at the city of Tulsa, and every tax-paying Tulsan can have a say in how we spend those taxpayer dollars in the budget each and every year.
Thanks, Greg, for that. My next question is, what are your plans to improve schools education, and how are you planning to do so?
Well, Amelia, as I know you know, I've spent a ton of time volunteering in schools, subbing as a teacher, and also partnering with Tulsa Public Schools. And my real job is Director of Family and Community Ownership at MedCares Foundation to actually found an elementary Greenwood Leadership Academy in North Tulsa. And what I have found in being in schools across the city is that we have some extremely hardworking and exceptionally talented professionals in those schools. But I've also realized that we, more than anyone else in the country, have students who are carrying a lot of trauma with them. Oklahoma Adverse Childhood Experience scores, better known as ACE scores, are the highest in the country. And so at the core of what we have to do is ensure that we are not just pushing our students to critically think, but we have to make sure that they know that we are critically thinking about them and their needs. That's why I think we have a responsibility as a city to work on what we can do for students and teachers outside of the classroom and after hours, after the classroom closes. How are we providing additional opportunities for up and coming students to be more prepared to enter into a 21st century workforce? How are we bridging the gap between our K through 12 education, our higher education, and our business community to ensure that we're supporting our business community with a ready workforce, and that we're providing students who need to make money and need to make money now an opportunity to do that outside of the traditional routes, just simply to college? I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity that we can tap into as a city, but I think we've got to take a hands-on approach and not sit back and just put that into the hands of the talented leaders at our school districts. The last thing I'll say is that, again, is why when you hear me talk about mental health resources, I'm going to weave that in to education, to economics, to public safety, because, again, if we are not getting to the core of supporting people and their mentalities, how do we expect families to survive, and how do we expect our young, tiny Tulsans, as I call them, to be prepared to put their 100% effort in the classroom? So we have to partner, Amelia, and really truly invest and advocate for what's best for our youngest and most up and coming Tulsans, and I'm prepared to do that.
Thank you, Greg. My next question is, well, my last question is, why do you deserve our vote and how will Tulsa benefit with you as mayor?
Wow. I should have expected you to ask the toughest questions of them all. Amelia, first let me say I'm honored to be here with the diverse array of Tulsans that we have on this call and the diverse array of Tulsans that I've been able to speak with over the 7 weeks that I've been on this campaign. And it is now for me where it started with me, which is a commitment to providing upward mobility to every single Tulsan, again, regardless of your race, regardless of your socioeconomic status, regardless of your zip code. Everyone deserves a pathway. I think that when you think about what the responsibility of a mayor is, what the responsibility of a city government is, it is to ensure that we're protecting our citizens and that we're protecting their opportunities and access to prosperity. That is what I am committed to. I am someone who is not afraid of the political blowback. I'm not someone who is trying to launch their political career. I don't mind being, frankly, a one-term mayor. What I do ensure you is that I will make the critical decisions to protect Tulsans at all times and not be swayed by political motives. I will build a collaborative, talented, diverse, and inclusive team to ensure that we are pushing this city to be the leaders in this region for decades to come. I think when you look at my history, someone who grew up here in Tulsa, came back to the city, worked in the streets, worked in the schools, worked in City Hall, not as an official, but as a citizen. I understand what we have as a city and what we don't have. And I am simply working to ensure that we get to a better space. I think that takes bold leadership. I may not be the leader for every moment, but I think I am the leader for this moment. And if Tulsans are willing to stand with me and put the work in to get us to a better place, I am certainly willing to lead them, again, regardless of the personal cost.
Thank you so much for your answers, Greg, and thank you so much for answering our questions and elevating our voices. I want to thank our moderators for your time. Thank you very much for participating in tonight's rally. I also want to say, to our audience, thank you for joining us.
And yes, thank you, Greg. And for more information, visit www.gregfortulsa.com. And don't forget to vote on August 25th.
You can also go to gregfortulsa.com to donate, to volunteer, or to seek any opportunities. Thank you very much. And stay tuned because next we're going to be delighted by a performance written by Written Quincy. Thank you.
Tulsa, my neighbors, mis vecinos. We are at the dawn of understanding where the sun is setting and dusk over the horizon brings a breathtaking view de cambio. We are evolving, and evolution has never been so picturesque. The brushes of the architect and her bristles like kiss beneath missile on canvas. This masterpiece of life and of humanity is larger than mural on one block of asphalt. It is flawless. Tulsa, my neighbors, mis vecinos, we are at the dawn of understanding, where the sun is setting and dusk over the horizon brings a breathtaking view de cambio. We are evolving, and evolution has never been so picturesque. The brushes of the architect, her bristles like kiss beneath missile on canvas. This masterpiece of life and of humanity is larger than mural on one block of asphalt. It is flawless. What some of us view as error, life demands purposeful. We are present on purpose, alive at the same time, minute, second, hour, the same now. We are all the same age. We are young, middle, elder. We are now. We are the town. We are black, brown, white, red, nation of natives and immigrants within a nation of proud stories where mothers and sisters and fathers and sons have nurtured the shoulders and backs of laborers who've toiled the soil to make Tulsa a plot on the map that not many know, but many have come to love, where the wind comes sweeping over the plains, over the hills and mounds, carrying scents and aroma of fried bread and arroz y frijoles. Cattle raised to feed 3 generations who celebrate independence and emancipation through veils of smoke from mesquite, apple, and pecan wood. East, west, north, south, midtown. Fleet of food trucks line communities where entrepreneurs generate culture. We are the town. The responsibility of the well-being of our neighbors relies on our neighbors' well-being. This is our town. Our babies learn the etiquette of showing respect to those who fight to provide a platform for them to use their voice. And when using their voice, demand respect and give eye contact for just the occasion. When in the event that you or your neighbor's citizenship rights are compromised, that justice and equity and safety and freedom will not be threatened anywhere, and definitely not here. Our town. Strong leadership edifies strong communities. Strong communities appoint strong government. And the strength of our city relies on we, depending on we, knowing we look out for one another. Neighbors, mis vecinos. Tomorrow is in arm's reach. Un día de viaje está en el horizonte, and as a community, we stand in solidarity. Greg Robinson. Accept this torch, engraved with the names of our ancestors who accepted the call before. Lead us. August 25th, 2020. Greg Robinson for our Tulsa. Let's go, Greg.
My name's Greg Robinson, and I'm running for mayor because I believe that we can build a city that works for everyone, that we can invest in inclusive economic growth, invest in mental and public health resources, and in innovative approaches to housing and educational equity. If you believe that every Tulsan deserves a pathway to upward mobility, then vote for me, Greg Robinson, for mayor on August 25th. Let's build something better together.